I'm talking today with Resonant, and we have their chairman and CEO, George Holmes, and their CEO, Dylan Kelly. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, great. Thank you for having us.
Great.
Kelly.
Well, so I did meet with you guys last year at 2019 Mobile World Congress and got a chance to hear a little bit about what you were working on then. Obviously, that show is no more for 2020, but tell us about what you were going to be highlighting if that show were happening.
Okay, great. Well, I think the key thing is we're trying to build on the success we had last year. Last year was kind of a coming out year for us as it relates to some new technology that we developed specifically for 5G. We demonstrated some of the first filters that had 10% bandwidth at that show to over 30 companies that came to visit with us. Through that engagement, we were lucky enough to sign a deal with the world's largest filter manufacturer for 5G filters focused on mobile phones. That leaves a big segment of the market. So what we were doing this year is we were going to actually demonstrate kind of our next generation of our XBAR filters that are specifically targeted for 5 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi applications. And that was kind of what we were looking forward to do, and we've got some great things to talk about. So thank you for having us.
Great. So can you step back a little bit and talk a little bit about the importance of filters, particularly in a 5G world, and particularly, as people start to utilize more spectrum in the midband? And Dylan,
Sure.
maybe that's a question for you.
Sure. Yeah, we think about spectrum as kind of like lanes on the highway, where you have traffic going in their lanes. What you don't want is cars bumping into each other and causing problems. What filters really do is channelize those different lanes and control the traffic flow and prevent data from interfering with one another. And as George brought up, last year we've shown filters that could accommodate 10% bandwidth, which is already revolutionary compared to traditional frequency bands that are maybe 3 to 4% bandwidth. And data rates are directly correlated with bandwidth. And what we were going to show this year was major breakthrough pushing 20%. And it's an exciting time in wireless, which we've been pretty stagnated in frequency ranges from 1 to 2 gigahertz for the last 20 years. There's been some push down below to 600 megahertz as T-Mobile launched, or maybe up to 2.5 gigahertz. But it's a new thing where we're seeing frequency bands being auctioned in the 3 to 5 gigahertz range. And the FCC is being very active, actually right now, on making these auctions happen. And as well as world deployments at what we call the N79 band and N77, where we're talking about 400 megahertz, 600, 900 megahertz kind of bandwidths. And that's what's going to be the key enabler for us to see 10 times increase in data rates on 5G networks and enable whatever the new killer apps are going to be. And that's what our company is really focused on, is as that technology launches over the next couple of years, is making sure we have the filters in place that can intersect the smartphone needs and make that reality of 5G happen.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit more in terms of 5G smartphone needs. How would you describe sort of the state of 5G development and sort of the steps that you see happening and the development that you see happening in filters, and how that sort of reflects overall where the ecosystem is right now? So 2020 is expected to be a really big year for 5G. What does that mean for filters?
We're very much on the hype cycle of 5G right now. What's been widely published is the evolution from LTE to 5G networks is going to be much more cost-effective for operators. So as user demand has quadrupled for data in the last couple of years, it's a financial strain. And so by going to the 5G network, even at existing frequency bands, they can maintain profitability while satisfying the increased user demand and not see prices to consumers going up. However, that's not going to deliver a differentiated experience. I think people's models are maybe 20% increase in real data rate per user. So you're not going to get those movies downloaded faster, or whatever applications need really high throughput. So it's going to be, this year will be a lot of subsidies in phones to get people over the hump on converting to 5G. But it's going to be a couple years out before there's going to be some major breakthrough in data rates. So it's more like 22, 23 time frame where we see these higher frequency bands, 3 to 5 gigahertz, being broadly deployed.
And is that a function of the amount of spectrum that's available in those bands? Is it a function of just the amount of development in terms of chips and other components? What is the the major factor there?
There's both the making the spectrum available is always a challenge because the legacy around all these different frequencies and other applications are used for. Also a technology bottleneck. There's not been to date filtering technologies that could meet those bandwidths. And so the industry's really been struggling with trying to figure out what they're going to do about it, which is why, what Resonance brought forward with the XPart technology so revolutionary and quickly triggered some of these big deals that we've put in place in the last year. So I think, the industry's racing to try to solve this problem. How do they enable all this newly available spectrum?
Well, the state of the art was, what, 3 to 4% bandwidth?
4%.
And now we came out and demonstrated 10% bandwidth last year, and now up to 20% bandwidth with these latest devices. It's a wholesale change to what the capability is. And now with the partners that we're working very diligently to try to move quickly to get these technologies into the market.
So going from even 10 to 20% in a year is huge, much less if the standard is 3 to 4%. Can you talk at all about how you folks have achieved that?
Yeah, the company was founded on taking a physics-based approach to trying to simulate the whole system of these acoustic wave filters, which are really complicated devices. And it's the first company to ever do it and be able to predict the entire product performance. And having that in-house capability is what created the insights around what really are the bottlenecks in these structures. What can we do differently in how they're constructed to expand the operating bandwidth capability. And I think both the industry as well as our own people have been really surprised at what they've been able to accomplish in expanding the bandwidth, the native bandwidth of acoustic wave filters. I think the other thing we're interested in is the Wi-Fi segment. We've talked a lot about 5G, but the same problems are showing up in Wi-Fi, where already today we have the 5 gigahertz band, which has really been standalone and has been kind of protected from interference, and there wasn't much filtering required. But as cellular is encroaching, and we've already seen the announcements about 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi, there was just a recent Broadcom announcement expanding there. All of a sudden, there's interference all surrounding the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi band. And there we have 1 gigahertz wide, and both at 5 and 6. So it's, again, having the requirement for 20% wide bandwidth filters.
Okay. So what is Resonant working on in 2020? What's ahead for you guys this year?
Execution. We have our plate very full. There is a lot of market pull for these kind of solutions. And so making sure that we execute in time to hit those market windows. In the smartphone development cycle, 2022 is right around the corner. So it's just keeping our nose down and make sure we have those technologies ready in time.
Well, I think the other thing is we can't forget that sub 3 gigahertz is not going away. So part of what we're working on, as well as the execution on kind of the 5G filters that Dylan spoke about, is making sure that we continue to enable our partners in the sub 3 gigahertz range. We just made a very significant announcement here just after CES, where we partnered with one of the largest foundries in China to actually develop and deliver parts into that marketplace and do it in a faster, better, cheaper time frame than what the major filter manufacturers can do to support the Chinese handset manufacturers. We're very excited about that. We think working with large tier 1 foundries is a way to take a new tack at delivering these high frequency devices into the market and do it in a time frame that is much shorter than companies have been able to do it on their own. So I think that as we look at what's happening in 2020, it's going to be a blend. It's going to be a blend of making sure we can enable, this rapidly commoditizing market with a new way into the market with better performing filters, and do that very efficiently through these large foundry relationships, as well as execute and deliver on the 5G devices that we're developing today.
Okay. So one last question for you two. When it comes to the importance of filters, how top of mind do you think they are for the industry? Does it tend to be, an enabler that that people maybe don't think about quite as much or take for granted. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems, as somebody who is not an RF engineer,
Uh-huh.
that it's a component I think that potentially gets overlooked.
Yes, your smartphone would not work without these acoustic wave filters. I mean, literally the network would not operate. And just to kind of put it in perspective, if we look at, say, the first iPhone launch, there might have been, I don't know, less than a handful of acoustic wave filters in the first iPhone. As we look at the latest generation of flagship phones, we're talking numbers of 60, 70, 80 acoustic wave filters in a device. And, it's well publicized that it's the highest value component, or, bundle of components in the smartphone, at least in the electronic section. It's also the most profitable business. So, this year, $12 billion in revenue associated with filters, and that's expected to scale to $25 billion by 2025. And this is back to adding more and more frequency bands so we can deliver more data on mobile networks.
But I think it's a great question, right?
Yeah.
Because from a consumer perspective, how do you get excited about these things that are the size of a grain of sand? And what does that really mean? Well, yeah, it's got more filters. What does that really mean to me as a user of a smartphone? Well, I think if you break it down, though, the one thing that we can see is nobody likes drop calls. People like to be able to watch their movies and then use their applications. Everywhere. They like their battery life to be long. I mean, all those things are enabled by good filtering. And, tangible things that we can see, those are the kinds of things that we can see that when filters aren't working well, phones get hot, your battery life is shorter, you don't get to watch the movies you want to watch. So while they're small grains of sand, they actually have a great impact on usability and the user experience.
Okay. Well, thank you both so much, gentlemen, for the time today. Best of luck in the coming year. And I'll be interested to see what you come up with in 2021.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much.